horror villains come in all shapes and sizes, and the creativity and imagination of the horror community has treated us to some truly unique and genuinely scary characters over the years. However, having a basic idea for a villain's appearance or means of killing won't always see them through to the end of a movie franchise. Explaining how these characters have found themselves in a horror movie, weapon in hand and ready to commit some crimes, can be a bit of a stumbling block for even the most experienced of writers. Whether it's just trying to shoehorn something in to justify a sequel, get around how they haven't actually died, or just move things along with the plot, there are plenty of examples of a chilling horror movie villain being let down by a bad explanation. I am the raised by rabid pigeons on the streets of Wolverhampton, Ash from What Culture Horror, and these are 8 terrifying horror movie villains ruined by terrible backstories. 8. Valk The Nun. As soon as Valk revealed itself to be the true mastermind behind the Conjuring 2's events, horror fans knew they had a seriously terrifying villain entering the game. And whilst The Nun was certainly a mixed bag that didn't fully cash in on all the potential it had, there's no denying that Valk was absolutely terrifying whenever it turned up. One thing most fans could have done without, however, was the backstory given to the baddie over the course of the film. Besides being an evil demon that wants to possess things and wreak havoc, there's not a whole lot more people want from their killer nuns, really. Instead, the nun spends far too much time going into how the demon was summoned by dark magic after a Romanian duke set up shop and began dabbling with Satanism. After the Vatican closed off the demon's ability to traverse into this world with the blood of Christ, the bombs of World War II, of all things, apparently opened things back up and allowed the demon to roam free again. Not only is this convoluted backstory unnecessary for Valk, but it actually ends up taking away from the terror of the character by stripping away that unstoppable power it carries and gives a clear-cut guide on how exactly the demon is gonna be stopped. 7. Slenderman. The viral sensation of the early 2010s, no one on the internet during this time could have missed the absolute panic Slenderman first caused. Receiving his own literature, video game, and plenty of other references in everything from Minecraft to Law & Order, a film featuring such a bone-chilling baddie was always going to come about. And whilst calling the Slenderman movie an embarrassment would be a kind description, its lanky villain was always going to keep audiences rooted to the spot. It's fair to say that most people who watched the Slenderman movie did so thinking they were going to get a simple story of the pale, suit-wearing monster terrorizing a group of people. What they probably weren't expecting, or asking for, was a series of confusing subplots about summoning Slenderman and him somehow only being after a certain selection of people before being on his merry way. Once again, it is the mystery behind Slenderman and the lack of a purpose behind terrorizing his victims that made him such a force for panic. Not complex supernatural stories about cults and rituals that suddenly make his killing negotiable. 6. Ben Willis. I Know What You Did Last Summer. The ultimate late 90s teen horror flick, I Know What You Did Last Summer, is known for its strong cast of actors and strange decision to go with a fisherman for a serial killer. However, this fisherman, named Ben Willis, actually does a great job in standing out as one of the most fearsome of slasher baddies to have emerged from the post-Scream world. Unfortunately for horror fans, I Know What You Did Last Summer decided to throw in a whole load of backstory for Willis into the mix. The subplot of Willis being one cog in a long line of vendettas and people being run over gets a little bit silly after a while, and the reveal of him being the killer of the person who murdered his daughter, and coincidentally the same man the teenagers first thought they had killed, is just a bit overkill. This whole backstory just ends up being far more akin to an outlandish comedy skit than it does the origin of a scary slasher villain. 5. Pennywise. It. Now, I'm not saying Pennywise doesn't need a backstory. I'm not even saying that the backstory we get in the film ruins Pennywise, in fact. Something as cosmically terrifying as this shape-shifting force of evil deserves a bit of weird exposition. But dig into the actual backstory of its creation in the novel and you get quite the head-scratching result. Really, for those familiar, can anyone claim to be impressed by the weird spacefaring story of its creation? A paranormal entity that must feed every 27 years, it itself is an incredibly well put together monster for most of its film appearances. So whilst I'm probably cheating a little bit by relating this back to the book more than anything else, the fact that we're given some wild interdimensional travel log that sees the creation of it tied to some big space turtle, yes, big space turtle, is just confusing more than anything. It is a story that eats itself by stretching into King's multiverse and getting lost along the way. The latest movie version does the best it can with the sources it's got by simplifying the story. Yet the OG novel doesn't half go down the rabbit hole with something eldritch and unknowable meticulously planned out to the point of farce. It just came out of the weird space void is definitely the way to go. Sorry, big space turtle. 4. Billy. Black Christmas. 1974's Black Christmas is one of the first examples of the slasher genre starting to find its place in the horror world, with the Canadian film finding the exact formula needed to bring even the most gory of kills to the audience's own neighbourhoods rather than just out in the middle of nowhere. As well as the uneasy sensation of seeing a mass murderer hard at work in an area pretty much anyone could see themselves living, what made Black Christmas so striking was how it kept the identity of the killer hidden from the audience all the way throughout. Not only did this lend the film a paranoid whodunit quality, but it also allowed director Bob Clark to get creative with zoom-ins on the killer's eyes, back, or just concentrating all of the camera's focus on his gruesome kills anonymously. The 2006 film of the same name is a remake of the original, but does attempt to provide something new by ruining all of the mystery and suspense of the killer, a man named Billy, and showing off everything about his hellish upbringing. Granted, there's never too much originality in a remake, but this sudden backstory that no one asked for takes away possibly the best part about the original film that said remake owes its entire existence to. 3. Pinhead, Hellraiser, Hell on Earth. One of the most recognisable and uniquely terrifying villains in the horror world, Pinhead has become the face of the Hellraiser series ever since it first hit the big screen back in 1987. Devised by the legendary Clive Barker, the series revolves around supernatural beings known as Cenobites, who, led by Pinhead, inflict pain and torture on the innocents they stumble across on their travels. 1992's Hellraiser Hell on Earth absolutely strips all of the mysticism about the Cenobites by explaining that Pinhead was once an army officer named Elliot Spencer, who began suffering from PTSD. What made Pinhead and the Cenobites so scary before was their complete inability to distinguish between emotions such as pleasure and pain, and a personification of how low humanity itself can stoop when it grows bored of its entertainment. To take some of that unknown away and give the big bad leader a real-world face, name, and story to empathise with just ends up doing the character's eventual scares more harm than good. The last thing in the world someone like Pinhead should ever be associated with is empathy, after all. 2. Freddy Krueger, Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. Freddy Krueger started out as a genuinely terrifying dreamstalker, slicing and dicing the children of Elm Street in their dreams as revenge for their parents taking the law into their own hands and burning him alive. It was a delightfully evil backstory for one of horror's most influential baddies. But where there are sequels, and A Nightmare on Elm Street has a lot of sequels, there's always a need for more backstories justifying a villain popping up time and time again. Matching the absurd direction the franchise was going in, it was revealed Krueger was actually born by a nun named Amanda, who was sexually assaulted by 100 psychopaths. After his human death, Krueger was saved by 3 demons, who after apparently searching for the most evil soul on the planet, allowed Freddy to carry on his killing in the dream world. It's a case of diminishing returns on the scares as the franchise goes on, and the constant shoehorning in of more and more pointless backstory goes a long way in confusing this entire icon's legacy. 1. Michael Myers, every movie after the first. Halloween's Michael Myers is somewhat unique in the horror world for boasting not 1, but 2 of the worst backstories ever written. First came the convoluted and eventually retconned storylines introduced during the 4th, 5th, and 6th films. According to these films, Michael Myers is a cursed puppet of the secretive and mystical group known as the Thorn. This group is responsible for inflicting the Curse of Thorn on Myers, causing him to become a mindless drone hell-bent on killing his next of kin every year. There's also a strange psychic link between Myers and his family, which doesn't help make things any easier to follow. Then we have Rob Zombie's 2 Halloween films that completely introduce a new version of Michael Myers' backstory, but this one is not much better. Portraying Myers' destructive home life, in this version of events, Myers' first kill isn't even his sister anymore. Instead, we get some random school bully coming in and taking that dubious honour for his own. Something about seeing this hulking, intimidating mass murderer as a stroppy preteen really does lower the fear factor the classic villain usually carries. And that's our list. Which other great villains suffered from a case of backstory-itis? Share your thoughts in the comment section below. I've been Ash over on social media at Ash Millman, and this has been What Culture. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and come back again soon for some more spine-tingling horror content. Thanks for watching.